Well, good morning, everyone out there. Welcome to the Midwest Pavement Partnerships first webinar for the 2023 calendar year. We aim to try to do these quarterly. This year, or this session, I should say, to kick it off, we've got a good program lined up for you. Today, we are going to be talking about our pavement management data and how we can use that pavement management data to help with your preservation program. But before we get going, we have a quick little poll that we would like to take just to kind of understand who we have in attendance. So when that poll pops up, please go ahead and answer that.
Okay, we're at 82% right now. 50% are state or provincial agency, 3% local, 41% industry, and 9% other.
Excellent. Well, since we have such a large state and local province group here, I guess I wanted to throw out one more quick reminder that Midwest, if you are a Midwest state or province, just a reminder that the data task force is also seeking your input on the cost database. Nicole Andres sent out an email a while back. The due date for that is February 20th, but I believe we'll still be accepting information beyond that. But just mark that on your calendar. If you haven't had a chance to submit that information, please do that. It's a great resource for all of us. It allows us to kind of check to see what's happening across across the region, and you can kind of compare prices and help you estimate projects if you want to try a new fix. But all right, without further ado, we will kind of get her underway. Like I said, we've got three great panelists for you today. We've got Tyler Hunt from the Michigan Department of Transportation. We've got Allison Lara from Saskatchewan Highway, and then we got Chris from Hepin County, Minnesota. And I will let them do a more formal introduction to themselves. So with that, Tyler, take it away, sir.
Thanks, Rob. Like Rob mentioned, my name is Tyler Hunt. I'm the Capital Preventive Maintenance Program Engineer for the Michigan DOT. I oversee our pavement preservation project statewide, basically planning and construction coordination, those types of things. So I have a background in maintenance operations. That's where I came from previously in our operations field services division. I made the jump over about a year and a half ago to this position. So I'm still learning. It's been great and enjoy what I do. So with that, I'm going to jump into the presentation then. I'm essentially going to be covering a few steps on how MDOT uses data for template planning, project selection, and specifically what we do in pavement preservation. So I think everyone has seen this graphic many a times. I'm assuming for those that haven't, this is our goal for pavement preservation to be on the green line there. Maintain, keep good roads good is more cost effective than letting them fall to major reconstructions. So the challenge is always, how do you identify that ideal age there at the bottom for a surface seal, or when is it time to do a rehab, and how to coordinate all that? So the answer to that is many factors, but data is one of the biggest. So I just wanted to note that there's many project selection considerations. I'm sure lots are aware, but I'm going to be covering a lot of the underlying ones briefly, but there's a lot of things outside of data that we utilize, especially in the preservation program, such as local acceptance of the treatment. So people don't want chip seal on bike routes, things of that nature, safety considerations and others. So that list there is what I'm going to be covering in this presentation. So I wanted to start at a high level, and where does MDOT use the data, and kind of a breakdown on the steps that we utilize it in. So the first level on the top is a network level. We use a software called Road Quality Forecasting System, and that software helps us determine where our network is currently. We break it down with deterioration models and how the pavements perform and how they deteriorate. Currently, we're doing a 1-year deterioration on our remaining service life, which I'll get into in a second. And then that at the network level is where our program projects are and kind of our strategies going forward. So that top level uses a lot of data, high level data. The next level down is strategic level. That's where we're kind of figuring out where we should focus our efforts for future work. We utilize the RQFS software for that as well. So there you can see we break it down into, there are many work types, but the major pavement ones are rehab, reconstruction, which is our very heavy work. And then the preventive maintenance program where we're doing pavement seals and what we call functional enhancements, which is basically single course overlays or concrete patching, that type of work. So from there, the next rung of the data and where we use it at is at the project level. So that's where we're actually determining the fix, taking into consideration other data types too, such as traffic, PCM data, and project history. So just to look at what we get from the network level data from our road quality forecast system, we basically get a look at our network high level and good, fair, and poor roads, MDOT. So we utilize RSL for determining the status of our roads, whether they're good, fair, or poor. We define RSL as the number of years before a major rehab or reconstruction will be more cost effective than preventative maintenance. And so you can see our goal there of 90% good roads in Michigan, and we've been trailing off, and we continue to trail off in future years due to lack of investment or lack of budget. I mean, not lack of investment. So that's the network level data, how we look at it and what we use it for. The next level down, like I said, was the strategic investment. So from RQFS, we determine strategies for investment type. So how much money should we put from each of the templates into certain regions and certain roadway segments. So it helps us break down where to focus the funds at a high level. And then from there, the next strategic thing is to look at the individual templates. And this is monies that are a breakdown of the budget for capital preventive maintenance. And we determine which category to focus our money towards: pavement sealing, functional enhancements, and some discretionary funds. So we're trying to move the needle, so to speak, on the condition of the roadway by directing our regions to invest in certain paving types. So the project level, we're getting down to that level, low level, right at the job level, and that's determining the fix. So we have a CPM manual, MDOT. It's a really great manual. It goes into detail on all the fix types we utilize in the program. Like I said, the remaining service life is one of the big ones. Distress index, which is a sunset index that quantifies the level of surface distress that exists on a pavement section into a composite score. We utilize that. As of 2018, that is sunset, so we're developing a new index currently. And we also use the standard PCM data, roughness index, IRI, rut depth, and then of course traffic data, project history, and a big data point, in my opinion, is engineering experience to determine project selection. So back down to the project level, just wanted to give an example of kind of what we do for selecting preservation treatments. We have a list of different preservation types in the CPM manual, and we break down the appropriate times to utilize those treatments based on traffic or PCM data, RSL, and DI. So we give the table there of what the minimum remaining service life of the pavement should be before you consider a chip seal, what the DI should be, the IRI, and rutting. There's also a lot of good write-ups in there on where we should focus it according to the ADT levels, turning movements, that types of things, and engineering judgment, of course. So limited turning movements, things like that. The next project level use of data example I wanted to give is crack seal. I think this is a good one for MDOT specifically. We currently do region-wide crack sealing contracts, and we proactively seal many lane miles of our pavement every year. The CPM manual gives a breakdown of when to use the route and seal versus overband method. Basically, you can use cracking data for that and VI. And there's also crack density criteria that we use for selecting routes that get the crack sealing. And then basically we say you need a remaining service life of 10 years. So let's not crack seal old neglected roads that are going to get a reconstruction soon to better invest our dollars. So yeah, similar to the chip seal, but getting right down to the nitty gritty of data utilization. And with that, that's all I have.
I'm gathering a list of the questions if you can hear me. And at the end of it, I'll go ahead and go through the list of the questions. And then, of course, if it's questions directed to a particular panelist, we'll take those at the end.
That's end of my presentation. So thanks.
Next on our list, we have Allison. We will flip it over to her and we can get a different perspective from our friends to the north.
Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully you can see my screen okay. As mentioned, I'm Allison Lara. I'm an asset management engineer here with the Saskatchewan Ministry of Highways. In my job, I focus mainly on asset management standards and modeling, but that includes actually managing our data collection contract. So I've prepared a bit of a presentation to kind of show you how we go through all the steps of our data collection and then how we build our pavement preservation program using that data. So to start off, we automatically collect our pavement network using an automated road analyzer. Typically, we do that in the months of June and July, and we collect that in 50-meter increments. We collect 168 different fields, but they all kind of roll up into similar things. So we're getting our pavement distresses like our cracking, our rutting, our roughness, including bumps and dips, our textural information, pickouts and raveling. We also collect a comprehensive set of right-of-way images. So it kind of looks like Google Earth or something when you're driving down the road. So you've got kind of real-time photos of the roads we're collecting. We collect about 50% of our network annually. We have 16,000 kilometers of pavement. So we collect usually between 8,000 and 9,000 kilometers every year. Once we've collected all that data, then it's time to start rolling it up and getting into our pavement preservation. So we roll it up into 3 primary distresses. We have the first one is unique to Saskatchewan. We call it our surface condition indicator, or a SCI, and that basically looks at your crack density and severity and some of your pickouts. Then of course we have rutting, the maximum wheel path rut depth that you might find on a road, and then our international roughness index, or IRI, to measure the ride quality. And then when we're selecting projects, we look at all 3 of those, of course. We also look at traffic volumes, our maintenance costs, how the road's deteriorating, and then kind of what budget we have and how much treatments are costing. We have 3 different treatment programs that we spend money in. We have our light program, which is more of your chip seal coating or your fog sealing, and those are triggered by SCI, so more based on cracking or pickouts. Medium program is more of your microsurfacing or your thin lift overlays, which are triggered by rutting. And then our heavy program, which is usually our resurfacing or rebuilding, which is primarily triggered by IRI, but it can be triggered by any of the 3 distresses. We do have trigger points for each of the distresses for the good, fair, poor ratios. So depending on what treatment you're looking at, they have different treatment trigger points. So to determine all of that, we actually use modeling software. Right now we're using Dayton Total Infrastructure Management System, or DTIMS, which is a Canadian software company that's actually used internationally to manage assets and budgets. So basically what you do is you take your budget and say, this is how much I have to spend in whichever category I have set up. And then it spits out a condition result and a construction program for me. So to go into that in a little bit more depth, so you input all your information, your inventory, your traffic, all that great condition data that you just collected, how much treatments are costing, and your budget, of course. So you set up the model and what budget you want to look at. Then the modeling software takes that all that good data you just put in, and it optimizes based on the pavement condition index. So that's something that we've built internally here at the Ministry of Highways. And it looks at kind of all your distresses, your cracking and your rutting primarily. We've built that based on our automated data collection. It's normally a visual assessment, but we've been trying to automate it just for this purpose. So it's something we've been working on lately. And then it takes that optimization period that you've set up for your life cycle costing, and it looks at the deterioration curves for each of the different distresses. So we've built some regression analysis for each of the distresses, IRI, rutting, and SCI. And then we've set up our different treatment trigger points. And so as the network deteriorates in the model, it will trigger treatments and then ultimately recommend a construction program. It will also show you how your network is deteriorating or improving as it may be based on that budget level and the treatments that are being triggered in the model. So you can kind of analyze it in each of the different distress categories. So your rutting, your IRI, or your SCIs in this case. And then, as I mentioned, it does spit out a very comprehensive construction program telling you what year you should probably select a treatment, what treatment type, and where it should go. You can adjust things as you go along, which of course you should do, and exercise some engineering judgment. So before we finalize our program, we do go out and verify things in the field to make sure that the modeling software is working correctly and that that's actually a treatment we would want to place in that location. And then we finalized our light, medium, and heavy programs based on the available budget. We also have targets that we're trying to reach for each of our distresses on our different networks. So we kind of compare what conditions coming out with our targets, and maybe we just don't have enough funding to meet our targets, or maybe something needs to be adjusted in the model so we can better meet our targets. Depends on what the situation may be. And once we've finalized our program, then we hand it over to our design group if something needs a design. And they also need condition data from us, so we do provide that to them, and that way they know how to design the road. It might be for something like rutting, the road needs to be designed for. Maybe they need to add something to address cracking, like rubber or fiber, to their design. So we do provide that to them to aid in their process as well. As I mentioned, we do collect right-of-way imagery, and some of the future uses that we're kind of looking into, and some folks in our ministry are getting interested in, is leveraging those right-of-way images to collect other assets. So things like light standards or power poles or signs or line markings, because we are driving down the road and we see all these things. So you can build algorithms to flag some of these objects, but a lot of it right now is very manual to go through and assess. So it may be not the most practical thing yet, but I think as time goes on and the technology advances, it's a possible another data collection point that we can get. So that's my presentation for now. I guess if there's any questions, we'll discuss them after the next presentation.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Kuffner. I am with Hennepin County in Minnesota. I'm the Asset Management Division Manager. I've been with the county about 1.5 years and was asked to give sort of the local perspective of a county in Minnesota and how we're using our asset management and pavement data, how we make decisions with our pavement preservation program. I've been with the county about 1.5 years, but prior to that, I had a 25-year career with the Minnesota Department of Transportation. And the most relevant position there was I was a district pavement and materials engineer responsible for the pavement management program in that particular district. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Hennepin County Pavement Preservation Program and how we utilize the data, but here's just a quick snapshot of our location. We're in the southern third of Minnesota, and Minneapolis is the largest city in Minnesota, and it is inside of Hennepin County, but we have a very diverse roadway network, and so we have a very heavy urban area of Hennepin County, which then is surrounded by first and second tier suburbs. And then our westerly third of the county is actually very rural in nature, and actually a big lake with many bays that has restricted access and things like that. So we've got 6-lane urban sections, and we have 2-lane, two-way roads with no shoulders, with a lot of cities and the largest population in Minnesota. So definitely some challenges in managing a program. And there are 87 counties in Minnesota. So this presentation probably isn't representative of all of them, as Hennepin County is the largest. And while any agency will say they don't have enough funding, the Hennepin County has a pretty good funding in the fact that we are able to afford and invest in our own data collection equipment. And so we have actually our own profile equipment. And then we have, so we run our roads every year. And of course, this is based off the International Roughness Index. But then that's a calculation to what's called a pavement surface rating, which has a 0 to 5 rating. And this coincides with how the Minnesota DOT reports their smoothness as well. So we're somewhat apples to apples. So anything above 3 is going to be good. Anything below 2 is going to be poor. But then we also do a pavement condition index, of which where we have staff that go out and still visually inspect all of those cracks and distresses, and ultimately plug that information into a program that results in a pavement condition index ranking from 0 to 100. And for several years, the Minnesota DOT has been providing pavement data via their pavement management bands to all of the counties in Minnesota. And they run that every other year. And I'll show you in a little bit, Hennepin County hasn't historically been using that, but I'm exploring ways to reduce some of the redundancy and utilize similar information and maybe improve safety for our staff that has been out there collecting that information. So, and other data, like the other two I've mentioned, I think the construction history is very, very important when you're considering your preservation program. You know, it's one thing if you've built a new road, how you're going to treat that for your pavement preservation. But if it's an older road with multiple overlays, that you may have a different strategy. So we have all that history dating back to the original construction and the subsequent overlays, surface treatments, and up to including reconstruction. So this is just a picture of some of the data that we get that combines those different data points that I was talking about. So it'll have our, and I'm hoping you're seeing my mouse move around, our road number, the from and the to, we have our commissioner districts, the length and the lane miles on that earlier graphic. I had some data on there, and we talk in terms of lane miles here at Hennepin County because of that diverse road network where, you know, you might have that 6-lane urban section trying to compare to a 2-lane rural, much different if you just talk in center line miles. So we discuss things in terms of lane miles, and then we'll know if it's a bituminous pavement versus a concrete pavement, or if it's bituminous overlaid concrete. And we'll know the date of our last surfacing, mill and overlay. Over on the far right, we have when it was originally constructed. So this particular road was constructed in 1989 out of bituminous, and its last overlay was in 2014. And then there's our condition data, the ride quality, and the pavement condition index. We also have another one called the pavement quality index, which is essentially an averaging of those two pieces of data. And you can see the different values that we have, some construction of concrete and when it was overlaid, so older concrete overlaid, but all of this is important data, right? So here we have some in our minds, this 2.41 is below a trigger point that you'll see in a little bit of when we should be considering an overlay. 3.44 would still be considered in pretty good condition. 3.28 is nearing that threshold from good dropping to fair, and we'll utilize that information. I'll show you in just a sec. But here's a picture of the Minnesota DOT data that is supplied to us as well. And you see some very similar information. We're getting IRI, which calculates into their ride quality, which happens to be RQI, and then their surface rating, so the measurement of the cracking, which is done automated. And then there's RUT data provided as well. And one of the main problems for us right now is it's the same road, but the segments don't align. They're not the same start and stop point. So and we're not tied to a linear referencing system quite yet. So we're trying to get into the 21st century on some of our data. And next important factor is the county does have performance measures and performance targets. for several assets, but for pavement, we are focusing on the ride quality. So we have a target of 67% in good condition. And you can see as of last year, we had 62% poor. That pavement quality index, same target, but of course that's bringing cracking into the equation. You can see that we have less percentage in good, so it means we have more cracking than what is evident in the ride quality. So a lot of cracking, but they're still riding fairly smooth in some cases, many cases as a matter of fact. So how are we using all of this pavement data? Well, obviously, I mentioned before, nobody has all the money they want, so we're trying to optimize every dollar we have available to us. We do not have any, I shouldn't say we don't have, we're not currently using a pavement management or modeling software. We have an older one that is available to us, but we haven't had the expertise nor the time to dedicate to that as of yet. But of course, so we're using this data in all facets of our program, our capital program of reconstruction and pavement rehab, and then all the way to our preservation program of overlays and preventive maintenance and chip seals and things like that. And we use the data slightly different. I'll be getting into that. Age and number of overlays and how those overlays are performing sure factor into our reconstruction candidates. You can see the next bullet there, data-driven decisions versus life cycle driven decisions. What I mean by that is our older roadways that were constructed 50 to 70 years ago and have multiple overlays. We're definitely tracking that condition indexes over time, and then as they approach our trigger values, we try to schedule them for overlays, and the farther they get down the path, more likely to be in our reconstruction categories. But what I'll talk about on new construction is more time-based treatments of, and Tyler might have mentioned that as well in the first one. When is that opportune time to put that first chip seal on? I've got a graphic in that a little bit, but more time-based than condition-based, so we don't miss any opportunities. Of course, we're striving to meet performance targets with all those decisions. And another great use of and having pavement data available to us is just simply answering questions. We get a lot of questions from public, and I mentioned there's 40 different cities, varying sizes in Hennepin County. Many of them want to know when the next project will be on the county road that's going through their city. And we can make educated responses by having, all that data available. It's a much different answer if, the last resurfacing was 3 years ago and the ride quality is still good versus maybe 12 years ago and approaching poor. We'll be able to give them a very educated best estimate as to when that next project will be there. Then the public obviously wants to have similar questions and get good answers as well. So some of the strategies here at Hennepin County, this is one that I feel very passionate about. I mentioned we have 2,200 lane miles, and about 1% of those are in our reconstruction program each year, so not a whole lot. So I've been stressing the importance to preserve those that do happen to get reconstructed. So those are going to be our first priority for preventive maintenance. I mentioned I had a long career at MnDOT and working with pavement management and our overlay programs there as well. And we tried a lot of different strategies to try to stop like reflective thermal cracking. As far as I recall putting 2 lifts of stone matrix asphalt on a cracked pavement, and those cracks reflected through in 3 years. So I came up with my mindset of the best treatment for a crack is to never let it happen in the first place. So let's try to keep that asphalt binder as flexible as possible, and in those first few years. So, and of course, we want to keep those good roads good. So how we use the data, we'll actually filter the data, and currently we're using spreadsheets for this. All that data gets exported to the spreadsheets, and so we'll filter on, hey, tell me what roads have been reconstructed or rehabbed in the last 10 years. And you see we did that recently, and that was 258 lane miles out of our 2,200. And we'll compare that to filtering the condition data, our ride quality data above 3.0, which is good. Still in good condition, same with the pavement condition index, and you can see some lane miles there. And then we'll compare that to that construction history, and then is there anything in the proposed capital program. And I think I'll reemphasize the point here that both Tyler and Allison stated as well, that we do agree that the data is a starting point. We use that to generate our lists, and then we do field reviews and engineering judgment as well to make those good decisions. Just touch base on more of the life cycle decision-making process on that new bituminous pavement. I saw in Allison's presentation talking about rejuvenators. There's been a lot of research at Minnesota DOT and their partnerships. And we're excited about the opportunities with rejuvenators. So we've just started to dabble with them. But if I could tell you our ideal strategy for a new bituminous pavement right now, it would be put a rejuvenator on early in its life, and then a couple of well-timed chip seals and crack seal throughout as those cracks appear. And then hopefully the first overlay can be held off till year 25 or later. One thing I'll mention there on that, we have a lot of debate here just in the whole asset management realm of, we're expending significant funds on durable pavement markings and monitoring the nighttime retroreflectivity. So while we might be able to argue someday that putting a chip seal on in year 1 or year 2 is the ideal time, but we're weighing that cost and whether or not we have to remove or impact the retroreflectivity of those markings. So our current thought is let's put a rejuvenator on early in the life, protect those markings, and then as the opportune time to put the first chip seal on might be at the same time when those pavement markings needs to be refreshed as well. So, and then to the far other extreme, we have 80 and 90-year-old asphalt pavements that have been overlaid 5 times. We may not have much of a preservation mindset on those other than to crack seal them and then the surface treatment if it's appropriate. And then here's just my last slide, a few strategies that we are employing here at Hennepin County. About 7-8 years ago, there was really 2 strategies, reconstruction and overlay. And as we've used pavement data and a more open mindset, you can see we've been bringing a lot of tools into the toolbox and some of the different criteria that we use and trigger points for those treatments. So with that, I will wrap up as well. So thank you, everybody.
Everyone, I apologize. I failed to mention at the beginning of the webinar that this webinar series is intended for you. As I dropped in the chat earlier, that we could easily fill the time with just presentations, but I think we all learn better together if we can have a discussion, if we can have a conversation. So I strongly encourage that if you've heard things throughout the 3 presentations, that you scribble them down on a piece of paper. It looks like, Tyler, there was a question for you that states, what parameter does MDOT use for RSL?
I did kind of gloss over RSL and how we use it. So going back, RSL is the parameter that we use. There is nothing that pulls into RSL. RSL is, we define it as the number of years until it's no longer cost effective to do preventative maintenance. So it's a ticking time down. It's an integer every year, how many years until that time, until such time that a reconstruction or rehab is the only fix that we should acceptably do on this road. We have a data set, pave map, that contains all the assigned RSL values on our entire network. Every segment has an RSL value assigned. Each year it ticks down by 1. So the next year it's 1 lower value. Now, a third of the network every single year is reviewed by our region offices to make sure that the pavement is corresponding to that timeline. It's very difficult to do in practice. We have been working on revamping it the last couple of years, redefining it, maybe pulling some more data in to help. But that's currently how RSL works. So for instance, when we do an overlay, the remaining service life is assigned a higher value, typically 9 years if we do just single course overlay. We add 7 years or 9 years, I can't remember which one it was, to that current RSL value to represent the fix. And then again, the next year it just starts ticking down again. So that is how we determine our good, fair, poor roads in the state. And then we also use RSL at the project level to make sure that you're, if you said this road was, only a 5 or a 4, we're getting close to that time where preventive maintenance doesn't make sense. So we want to make sure that we're doing that. So I hope I covered that question.
Next question I have, I'd like to direct at Allison, our partner to the north, where it's currently -1 degree Fahrenheit with a wind chill of -20. The first thing I did when I looked up Regina is the question from Google is the coldest province in Canada? So my question to you, my friend, is because I don't have DTEMs, but this particular question asks, how do you marry what DTEMs recommends to your pavement preservation plan? You mentioned light, medium, and heavy, but how, as we are in a pavement preservation partnership, do you marry what DTEMs says you should do with your actual funding? And a caveat to that, do you actually have a pavement preservation, perhaps a 5-year plan up in the ministry to implement what it says? Allison?
Yes, we do. So what you can do in DTIMS is you can set up different budget scenarios. So if you know your budget for the year or the next 5 years, because we do have a rolling 5-year capital plan. We do, like, our light and mediums we do on a 2-year kind of rotating cycle, and then our heavies we do on a 5-year cycle for planning ahead. But you can set up the budget. So if you know your budget and you can adjust it every year, you set up a scenario and say, okay, I want to spend X amount of money in light, X amount of money in medium, and X amount of money in heavy. And you can set up the model to do that, and it will recommend treatments up to that funding level. It may not even get to that funding level if the model doesn't think that it needs to spend that much money. You can also set it up in DTIMS to do unlimited. So if you say, hey, DTIMS, tell me the best projects ever, here's an unlimited amount of money, go for it. It can do that. You can tell it to spend no money, or you can set up, instead of breaking it into the light, medium, and heavy categories, you can say, here's my total amount of money. Tell me how to spend it in my light, medium, and heavy. So there's a variety of different ways and scenarios that you can set it up. Typically, we run a bunch of those scenarios and then see what sort of projects are being generated. And then once we go out and do our field reviews, you can actually go back into DTIMS and you can adjust your strategies. So if it's, say, recommending a chip seal in 2023, but you don't think that's the most appropriate treatment, you can either cross it off the list, or you can say, no, don't do that till 2025, and it'll adjust everything in DTIMS in your construction program for you. So it's kind of a handy tool for that. We haven't gotten super into that portion of it yet because we've only been utilizing the software for a couple years, so we're still in a bit of a learning curve. But it is a very powerful tool and can do lots of those things. I hope I answered all of that.
We do it manually here at MoDOT, just like apparently Chris does. In Hennepin County, we don't even have that system, so you really helped me out on that one. Why don't I throw this one out? It's a generic question. I don't care for it too much, but I got to ask it. What about this recent spike in the Midwest, at least, regarding construction costs? Does that affect the way that you're gathering your data? Does it affect the way your computers are generating it? In this particular state, we've seen a 35% spike in costs of programs, thus allowing us to reflect and maybe add additional pavement preservation pavement preservation treatments, forgive me. Why don't I ask Tyler that first? Do you see a spike like apparently everybody's seeing, where you were going to overlay it and then subsequently the computer said X? How do you, or do you even have that problem up north?
I guess when you say, does the computer say, should we overlay?
That's your program. Let's go with program.
Yeah, so I think we've needed to focus more on preservation. And it's turning into, when you do a 2-course or major reconstruct, you know, the inflated prices, of course, it's a higher dollar value just because it's a larger fix anyways. So we've been moving more towards, do we need to have such a substantial fixes when we have our costs are this high or they're rising? We've moved to more single course or additional preservation, kind of stretching our preservation template out and doing more roads than we have in the past. So we're just as lean as we can be. The strategies do take into account our funding and typical costs for projects. So yes, the investment strategies do reflect the current increases, but on a project selection level, we've been just trying to move our fixes around, our fix types to kind of meet the dollars that we have. So I hope that answered your question somewhat. It's pretty complex, everything that's going on, and there's a lot of different job types. So do our best with the funding we have.
Agreed. I stumbled over that question. Go ahead, Rob.
Well, and I was going to say, to add on to Tyler's, and one of your main questions in there, Bill, is yeah, I mean, Michigan DOT is seeing an increase in prices for fixes, and that ultimately impacts the number of lane miles that we've been able to touch, over the last couple of years, and moving forward, I should say, right now too.
Correct. And in MoDOT, which is where I work, we are actually adding 0 new jobs. So all that data we collected with Fergo, which I think is what Allison uses. And we have a whole bunch of data that we collect, up to 31 different metrics, and we were only using 5. And now I'm going back saying, what else is it really telling me? In other words, like I want to ask out loud, we do a lot more visual now than we ever did just a year ago to say, hey, is this really a candidate for, I don't hear insert random treatment, because we're changing a lot of that stuff. So it's ironic as we talk about pavement gathering programs and data management that perhaps even in this state, we've taken a step backwards and saying, I don't know if I trust the data that I was gathering just a week ago. So I think that was the root of the question. Rob, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You were saying?
Yeah, I just kind of added a little bit to Tyler's stance and answering the base question of, yeah, Michigan is seeing an increase in construction costs.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that. Thanks, Rob. It's definitely, it's on our radar. It's every year, seems like. It's not just tracking with inflation. So yeah.
Okay, cool.
I'd say it's similar in Saskatchewan as well. Like, we're seeing an increase in costs. It hasn't impacted how we're collecting our data. We're still going through and collecting our data, but it is limiting our ability to add projects to the program because you're doing fewer and fewer kilometers every year. So our 5-year program has grown into a 7 or 8 or 9-year program, and we haven't added anything new. So it just sort of, as things change, your program changes and you just adjust to it.
I feel amiss I didn't ask Chris the same question. Do you want to add anything, Chris? Well, you're so rich there.
Very, very similar response. I think with set and consistent budgets each year, so we have we know how much money we're going to have. And this particular year, we also have lane mile goals for treatments of, say, combined of overlays and chip seals, right? So if it was, where's my camera? If it was this much of overlay and this much of chip seal, the chip seal is cheaper, right? We might have to do more chip seal and less overlay to try to cover, the same amount of lane miles. Be one other strategy to consider.
Rob, that's about all I've got to ask. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we issue our final thoughts and poll?
Yeah, we still have a little bit of time. Again, hopefully some folks, if you heard anything, please feel free to throw it in there. Chris, I want to ask you something I saw in your presentation. I think you had shown a strategy, a proposed ideal strategy of a new HMA reconstruction and kind of a timeline of different treatments. Now, is this something that you have been able to do successfully at Hennepin County or in Minnesota DOT, or is this still something that you're looking to achieve?
Yeah, I would say a little bit of both. It's the long range objective, especially on those new construction roads. I even had that opinion at MnDOT. You do a heck of a lot more overlays and what we call them Band-Aid overlays, and those aren't your best preservation and preventive maintenance opportunities. Let's when we do make the big capital expenditure, let's make those our first priority and be sure we preserve those. Going forward. So yeah, it's a little bit. We've just started to implement it. Yep.
Okay, Allison, do you guys do anything similar in Saskatchewan? Do you guys try to plan out treatments, or is it kind of, relying a little bit more on the data to make a call when you're doing something?
It's a little bit of both. We utilize the data, but we also know that certain treatments work most effectively in a certain time window. And then we try to say, okay, this treatment first, then this treatment next, and this treatment next. But it is somewhat dependent on what sort of distresses you're seeing. Like maybe a road isn't cracking very much, but it's sure rutting. So maybe you skip the chip seal and go right to a micro rut fill or something like that. But I'd say typically there's a pattern.
Yeah, not meaning to speak for Tyler, but I know, you know, in Michigan, we've kind of kicked that idea around, you know, with the life cycle. Do we, especially with our new reconstructs, should we be looking at a plan of, you know, giving a range on when particular preservation treatments we should really be considering to try to extend the life of that pavement as much as possible, kind of like what you're saying, Chris, with that flexible pavement. If we can get the right type of treatments on it and keep it flexible to prevent those cracks. Minnesota, Michigan, we're dealing with the same type of weather conditions. Those freeze thaw cycles are our worst enemy. So we have a we take our pavement management engineers from across the state, and we kind of have a group that we call the pavement working group, and we meet at least monthly, if not every other week, and kind of chew on these different ideas on how to, you know, what's the best way to be managing our entire network from a statewide level to a smaller level, you know, from a regional level across the state. Another question that I'm seeing is chip seals. When, I guess I'll throw this one out to everyone. What do we think on a newer construction HMA pavement? What do we think a good timeline is to apply our first chip seal?
I guess I could go first. This is something I've thought about. We have local counties in the area that chip seal the next year after an overlay, and they think they see the value out of that. I'm a little more conservative than that. I think we need to develop somewhere and allow the HMA be out there for 2, 3, 4 years, and then apply the chip seal. And I feel like the life extension is longer in that case. But it is good, especially like Rob mentioned in our freeze thaw cycles, to have a sealed surface and a wearing course when these pavements just have such a hard life in Michigan. So I would like to do our chip seals earlier, but I think from a funding standpoint, that 5-year-old pavement to 7-year-old pavement is an okay candidate depending on the condition. So
I think I would echo what Tyler said. I think my stance would be it's never too early to chip seal it, but is the cost effectiveness really there, and is 5 to 7 acceptable? I would think it is.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I think there's other treatments available that are cheaper that could be utilized. Like we had been talking about rejuvenator fog sealing. I would maybe consider doing that first and then getting into a chip seal kind of in that 7-ish year range. But again, subject to conditions. I don't see a lot of value in putting it on in the next year. I don't think that's necessarily an effective use of your funding. That's my personal opinion.
A lot of conversation with HMA pavements. I know Michigan, we got our fair share of concrete or rigid. Allison or Chris, do you guys have rigid pavements? And if so, what are some of the preservation techniques, and how do you utilize the data to plan those treatments?
In Saskatchewan, we don't. We actually use flexible pavements pretty much exclusively. I know we've thrown around the idea of rigid pavements, but we don't have any tools in our toolbox right now for that. So I'd actually be interested in hearing some more about that if anybody else has some good input.
That's what we have. Pretty limited amount of concrete pavement in Hennepin County. Of the 2,200 lane miles that we have, like 100 miles are exposed concrete. We have plenty of overlaid concrete. So I think back in the 1950s and 60s, it was pretty popular to pave concrete pavement on the county system, but those have been overlaid with asphalt, a lot of them numerous times. But I had plenty of experience back in my Minnesota DOT days as well with concrete pavement. And, you know, the quality of the concrete has changed over time. It's really improved in the last 20 plus years. Resealing joints, doing minor repairs in the first 15 to 20 years is certainly advisable. And then some of the major full depth joint repairs later on in its life is obviously advised as well. And one thing, so like I said, we have 100 miles and the majority of it is pretty old, and our ride quality data, IRI, is very high on those. They've been rehabbed. They're not necessarily in bad condition, just they ride very rough because they've never been diamond ground. So that is what I'm proposing for some of our future concrete maintenance, is that whatever work we do on them, even if it's just resealing the joints and doing some minor repairs, is that we include that diamond grinding on it to improve that ride quality as well.
Yeah, I'll just say that at MDOT, outside of grinding, grooving, resealing, like Chris mentioned, I think as far as preservation goes, composite pavements with concrete under the HMA are sometimes a different animal than full depth flex, and a lot of times are. You need to get after them early in the preservation cycle if you're ever going to hope to preserve those. The thermal movement, all that cracking, you know, you need to handle it with a seal, and sometimes there's not even enough value there to seal some of those routes. The reflector cracking so bad. So I struggle with that a lot. We have many thousands of composite lane miles at MDOT, and it's a challenge from a preservation perspective. And also, like Chris mentioned, doing the patching on concrete, resealing on concrete. Concrete is a tough nut to crack for preservation as well. Unless you want to spend many millions of dollars doing patching, a lot of times it's better just to do, you know, full depth reconstruction. But we do preserve concretes. We do quite a few reseal jobs. But yeah, thanks.
Our next question, if I could ask it, Rob? We got a few minutes. Okay. Next question, Chris. Looks like you're on again, buddy. What are the benefits you're seeing from rejuvenators? When do you apply them? And any distresses or new pavements? Have you done a side-by-side comparison? And before you answer, I'd like you to reference, if you know anything about that NAA study that you probably know about up there. Chris, let's talk about rejuvenators quickly.
Yeah, so we put our first rejuvenator on a couple of years back as a very short segment of maybe 500 feet, 1,000 feet, something like that. One on a mainline section and then one on a shoulder, just as a very early experiment to do that side-by-side comparison. It's only a couple of years old, but I wouldn't be able to say there's any difference in the pavement management data yet, but visually it looks good, good enough for us to go ahead and try another couple miles last year, and then we're talking about maybe a bigger program, 6, 7, 8 lane miles this year. So too early for me to give my opinion on its effectiveness, but no major problems either, which is just as important, right? There's concerns about pavement marking. There's concerns about loss of friction. So we haven't witnessed that on the couple of trials we did. And I'm certainly aware of the NRA experimentation, very, very interested in hearing the results, but I have not been closely tied in with it.
Good, I'll field that one. Allison, who asked the question. Go ahead and look up National Road Research Alliance. It's on MnDOT's page. There's a 5-year study. We're currently about year 3 in figuring out what rejuvenators do, how they do it, why they do it. It's pretty extensive, and MoDOT definitely was excited about this particular program. I sit on the tap on it. So the answer, Chris, is we don't know yet, but we're putting it up in a town called St. Michael's, which is somewhere in America, north of me. And it's actually going to be exciting. So If I can get your email, Allison, I might actually email you a direct link, but go ahead and look at NRA's website regarding rejuvenators. I think it's going to get a real good, in partnership with NCAT, some data out there on, is this stuff actually effective in the program. Rob?
Has anyone utilized the PMS data for developing inputs for LCCA, such as typical timing of treatments and types of treatments? That one's for the entire field, if anybody wants to weigh in on that one.
All right, we'll go with I don't know. And I'll have to get back to that particular partner, not now.
Yes.
Phone. Well, let's get another one then. Chris, once again, you seem to be quite often popular. I've heard MnDOT, Minnesota, forgive me, is looking at putting joints in the asphalt composite pavement. Have you done that in your previous career or current career?
Working joints into a new composite pavement? We have not done that, no. So that I'm trying to, is that to try to probably control the cracking over the concrete joint below it? I could see some potential value in that. I'm a little skeptical though, as I do think the power of the, like I think Tyler was getting at, that movement that's happening in that concrete, expansion, contraction, I think that's going to win.
Yeah,
All right.
what I've read from the research done on that, I believe it was Minnesota years ago, did a few of those jobs. It's difficult to saw cut right at the crack, and a lot of times the cracks propagate outside the saw cut anyways. So just let them crack and reseal them is my opinion on that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Michigan, we experimented a little bit with that. And as Tyler stated, and what you're alluding to, Chris, that trying to line up the saw cut exactly on top of the existing joint, I think ended up being a little more of a challenge than what everybody anticipated.
Well, when I asked for questions, good Lord, people, well done. There's a boatload of them. So I'm going to slowly go through it. I'm going to jump around on you. I'll ask it quite bluntly. Go back to my friends way up north. Dalbar retrofits. We haven't talked about rigid concrete. With reference to Dalbar retrofits, I understand many DOTs have used them to be cost effective. Does you gather that somehow in your pavement gathering data as an option? The Saskatchewan, it's your turn.
We don't use rigid pavement, so
no.
no.
Good. That's easy.
I don't know if it's an option that we're going to kind of get into, but right now the answer is no, we don't use that at all.
Up north, you guys got concrete, surely, right? We use it extensively. I could talk, but I'm not a panelist. Chris, first, then Tyler.
So our data doesn't report like faulting.
Ours does, yeah.
Okay. But our roughness would certainly be impacted. And so on a concrete pavement, if it was super rough, that would be a trigger for us to go out and look at it. Why is it so rough? And then if faulting was the primary cause for that roughness, then we would consider Dalbar retrofit followed by diamond grinding.
Mr. Hunt, anything?
We've done it in the past, similar to what Chris said, is wait for the faulting data to show up and determine if retrofitting, Dalbars at the slab makes sense, to kind of control that. I think we've had mixed results. Maybe Rob knows more than I. With that in the past, they're very expensive projects, and we don't know if the cost is worth it, basically, especially in preservation. So,
yeah, I mean, there was an era, I want to say maybe mid to late 90s, that we did a fair amount of them, and we've seen good performance with them when it's done properly. It's just the cost of them started to become not cost efficient, to where our contractors started to throw out there, at this cost or less, we'll just replace the joint itself. So, and that's why we ended up backing away from the Dalbar retrofit. So one other fun little tidbit on that fix. So if you're in a state or a province that you're seeing a push, and you know, this will be for you too, Phil, and MoDOT. Autonomous vehicles. We actually got contacted by General Motors that when their lane detection system, when they come up to the Dalbar retrofit fix in the pavement, if for those who aren't familiar with it, that there's little rectangles to where they saw cut out, put the Dalbar in, and then patch over top of them. The autonomous vehicles, their computers see that, and it goes from a 3-lane or 4-lane section to where all of a sudden it picks up all those additional rectangles, and it tricks the computer thinking that it's in a 12-lane section, to where we actually had General Motors reach out to us and say, hey, are you guys still doing this fix? Is there any way you could stop doing this fix? And we politely said, thank you for your input, but if it works for us, we're still going to be performing the fix. But,
Cool. I didn't know that. But
yeah.
to answer Mr. Martin, and I'm trying to give you MoDOT's answer, even though I'm not technically here. We extensively use Dalbar retrofits to bore you to tears, and I'm sorry to use imperial measurements, but we used to use 33 1/3 for our joint spacings, cracks at about 17. We put in 3 sets of Dalbars, 5 bars, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 in the wheel pass. That's extremely effective. So that's the answer. And as you've heard me speak before, we're moving toward a little more hot polymer concrete patching material concept. This is this fibercrete, and that is what's replacing it. The challenge is the DVRs are working great. It's just the mortar around them that's popping out. So to answer your question, Mr. Martin, ineffectively perhaps, it's extremely worthwhile for MoDOT. We've been doing it at least since 1983. And the ones that I'm repairing as pavement engineer have been down at least 15 years. So I would go ahead and say it's probably cost effective. To answer it on a computer base, yes, one thing I told you, we're going back and looking at things. We have 31 metrics, and I'm not looking at them. Yeah, faulting's a big one, Chris. I haven't looked at faulting. We looked at IRI because it was easy. Now we can actually go back in every frame, and say, well, son of a buck, that's really human effective. Yeah, there's an answer. There's an answer. We'll grind them down, put DVRs, and call it good, and keep our rigid pavements rigid. Thank you, Mr. Martin. I apologize for not getting that earlier. You have many a question.
I was gonna jump on for Allison. Sorry, yeah. Could you go into more depth on the pavement analysis software that is used? How long have you been using it? How was it to develop? How is it? What is the calibration process?
Sure. We've been using it for a couple of years, but there was some setup time involved before that. It probably took us 2 years to get it set up. And it is sort of a learning curve too. Like, I think it's a dynamic process. Once you've got it set up, I don't think it's set up, it's good. No, you kind of adjust things as you're going through because you're learning what the model's doing as you watch it run. It is time consuming to set up because there's a lot of variables, a lot of treatments. It depends how many treatments you have, I suppose. A lot of data to get in there depending on how big your road network is. So it is a difficult thing, but I think overall it's worth it because particularly if you have a larger network and you can add other assets too. It's not just exclusive to pavement. If you want to model bridges, you can model bridges. So you can use that to kind of get it to tell you where to spend your money. Maybe it's more effective to spend it on bridges. Maybe it's more effective to spend it on pavements. You can get it to tell you that. So it's a really powerful tool, but it's only as good as the data that you've put into it. So if you have bad data or your setup's not quite right, you're not going to get the result you're expecting. So it's really useful as I'm learning to know the back end of it, know how it's working, know what you should be getting, and then if you're not getting what you're expecting, know how to go back and fix that. So not only am I a civil engineer, now I'm kind of becoming a programmer and computer scientist, learning lots about that. And their support system's really good too. So if you are having issues, they're certainly very helpful in getting you answers to why some things might not be working the way you expect. Hope that answered the question. It's kind of it is a learning curve.
Yeah, no, I was just going to agree with you that depending upon where you're at career-wise and in the projects that you're involved with. Little did I know how much computer programming or input you would start to have. You know, sometimes it's easier to just stick with the pavement and walking the grade personally, but comes with the territory, I guess. Let's see here, we've got one. What is your timeline for putting a chip seal on a reconstruct? We already covered that one. Chris, I think this one's directed to you. So the older or multiple layer pavements only get a crack seal. What is the schedule for that? How long do your overlays last?
Pretty variable performance, but as I said in my intro, I've been here about a year and a half, so still learning the system. What we've learned fairly early on was a lot of the roads that are older, pre-1990, were built right on the existing soils, right? So if it was clay, that was just thick asphalt paved on the clay. So those overlays are not lasting very long, right? So if we're on our 5th overlay, we might expect, 10 years out of that overlay. But if it's had a good sand subgrade with some aggregate base and it's on its 3rd overlay, that one may last 15 to 20 years. And then that one I would consider different. I may say let's crack seal and chip seal, or consider a surface treatment on those that are expected to perform better. Reflective and thermal cracking is such a predominant distress here, and it kind of drives our overlay programs that in my mind, the chip, it's where that big rip and crack is the problem, right? But in between the cracks, everything's great. So the chip seal would preserve that, but you still have that big rip and crack and the potholes forming at that reflective thermal crack. So that's why I would say probably shy away from surface treatments on those older segments. But.
All right, so the question is, do any of your agencies have a PM data quality assurance process in place? If yes, could you explain the QA process that you use? Thanks.
Real quick answer, keen eyes. Reviewing and looking for anomalies, yes.
In Saskatchewan, yes, we do. We do review all the data they send it to us in batches, and we review it to make sure it's falling within the bands that we've told them. And if there's an outlier for some reason, we do go through it with our consultant to say, hey, why is this anomaly here? And maybe it's a data collection issue, maybe it's another issue that was just a bit of an anomaly in the pavement, maybe. So we're pretty good about going through it on our own and then going through it with our consultant. So we've got some spreadsheets built to analyze and different bands that each distress needs to fall within. They also do a lot of calibration on their own equipment when they're doing it. So they go back to one of our test sites and calibrate and make sure that we're getting similar results all the time. And we just compare those results to see if they are kind of all coming back similar.
Yeah, we have a unit in our planning division that handles all the data, the condition data, distress data, and they do verifications and they do all that. But again, like Chris said, we're verifying at the job level to make sure the data makes sense. There's some data metrics that are better than others, in my opinion. IRI, I tend to trust quite a bit in our cracking percentage, and some others maybe a bit less, just due to the nature of how it's collected. But for the most part, yes, all our data is QA'd.
Chris, looks like we got another one for you. How did you decide that you will only do 1% reconstruct or only 25?
That pure funding based. So we have targets to do even more than that, and we've made presentations and would like to continue to make presentations to our county board to show that the need is higher. That's funding based. From 2000 to 2010, I was just searching on this by decade, we averaged over 35 lane miles of reconstruction. And just probably as we talked before, costs are going up of reconstruction projects. The water treatment facilities is more, for underground storage and infiltration and all that. So everything costing more, so we're doing less lane miles with a very stagnant budget.
I'm going to take that, Phil, as my key to ask another one out there. Um,
I'm still
How are
replying to
you-
these people. Sorry.
You're good. No, I appreciate you kind of manning that side of it too. How are you incorporating structural condition of pavement in terms of choosing the right rehab? I think it's directed at Chris, but I think it can apply to the other two panelists as well.
Well, I'll start with that situation I described with the thick asphalt pavement on the weak subgrades. They are not necessarily all meeting what a 10-ton design. Our goal with any rehab project would be to meet the current design standards. In the cases where we can't, then it would, we have only a lot of times that requires to raise the profile or get deeper into the subgrade and strengthen the subgrade rate. So hopefully in 95% of the cases will be meeting the current design standards, but in those cases where it won't, we'll, I'm still willing to do like a cold in place recycling with a 3-inch overlay on top of it to hopefully extend that road longer than just the 2-inch mill and overlay would have, even if it won't officially meet, those the 10-ton design standard.
In Saskatchewan, we don't consider structure directly in any of our modeling, but we do consider wearing course. So we might recommend a different treatment depending on what's there. We do have some roads that don't have asphalt concrete on top at all. They have just a chip seal over top of base. So some of the treatments we might recommend might be a little bit different on those roads. But generally speaking, the structure doesn't come into it until the design phase if you're getting into that rehab or reconstruct phase.
Mr. Hunt, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I guess there's so many factors, but typically what triggers a rehab for us would be the RSL value I talked about before. Once the RSL starts ticking down near zero, thin treatments, even thin overlays just don't make a lot of sense. If we're doing, let's say, a full depth joint repairs on a composite pavement every 20 feet, it's not worth it to do a single course in that scenario and do all that patching. So let's go down, fix it, and put 2 courses back and get some longevity. And then there's also, are we in a high volume route where we have lots of maintenance traffic costs? Do we want to be coming back here in 8 to 10 years to do another single course? So there's other considerations like that too. But in general, is the road highly distressed, then it falls out of preventive maintenance for us.
Well, taking a quick look at the time, we've got 12:23 Eastern. We've got 7 minutes left in our program. I think we may have hit all the questions, but one of the things that I want to do is myself, Bill, and the panelists, I'll see if we can capture these questions and kind of quickly go back through them. And if there's nothing that, if there's one that we did not address, we will try to get the answer back out to you. I hope everyone here, first, I guess I'd like to thank our panelists. You guys did a fantastic job. Second, I want to thank all the attendees. I apologize. I fumbled the football on this one on where the questions were coming in at. And then made life hard on Phil on bouncing around, asking questions, so trying to keep them straight. Thank you for your patience and rolling with us, but I hope everyone found that this is very valuable. Again, the intention of this webinar series is for you to allow you to ask questions that you may have. Because I think one of the things that comes out with these is we may be sitting in different chairs, different states, but we're all wrestling with the same stuff. So hearing how others are approaching it, I learned personally from that way, scribble down some notes on what to go look at. So thank you. Bill, did you have any closing remarks before we do the closing poll?
No, I appreciate it. Opening that can of worms on rejuvenators. There are 3 of you that I've been answering. I'll get back to you. I'll grab your emails. The questions you asked are awesome. However, I don't know all the answers, and it would take longer than time. So rest assured, I've got all 3 of them, and I will be contacting you from a philip.rufus@modot.mo. Back to you, Rob.
So, again, hopefully you guys found this valuable. I am all about providing information that you all want to hear and learn from. So this closing poll that's going to pop up on your screen is going to be a question on future topics. Take a look at the poll. If any of those kind of interest you, please select those. Otherwise, I think you can drop them in the chat for future topics. And just so everybody knows how this works, we here at Midwest Partnership, we have what we call a task force. There's 5 of us or so that, you know, look at your guys' suggestions and then reach across the Midwest looking for fantastic panelists like we have today that may have some experience in the subject that you're asking about, so that then we can create these open forums to continue to ask questions and learn from one another. So please take the time to do the poll and throw in the chat any additional topics that you would like to see us talk about. Double benefit, right? Not only do you get to learn a little bit more about specific preservation treatments and happenings, but for those of us that are licensed, we also can gain some credits to keep our licensure.
5 different topics. Thanks, guys, for putting that in the questions. I will forward those to you, Mr. Green.
Did we cover performance measures at our Missouri meeting last fall, Mr. Rufus?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
Maybe we can talk. Sorry, go ahead, sir.
No, I was going to say maybe we can kind of reconvene for the folks that weren't able to attend. I know Mr. David Petchkin is, I think, our lead on that for sure. But
correct. And again, I have to just give you kudos, people. I've never seen this many comments or questions. Well done. I have now 9 different ideas, Rob, that you can see in the questions that we can talk about. If you want to talk about polymers and pavement, MoDOT has extensive experience in doing that, so we could definitely explore that, as well as many other ideas you have in the chat.
I do greatly appreciate it. I appreciate everybody's participation. Thank you again to the panelists. When you see the next one coming out next quarter, please share it with your colleagues and other peers in the pavement preservation world. We're looking to continue to get out and spread the good word. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time and have a safe day.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.